This is Debt Free in 30, where every week we take 30 minutes and get practical advice from industry experts about personal finance and living debt-free. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Every year, the federal government, through the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, proclaims November to be Financial Literacy Month. Is there any point in the federal government promoting Financial Literacy Month? Does it accomplish anything? This year's theme is Invest in Your Financial Well-Being. The government wants to encourage Canadians to take control of their finances and reduce financial stress by making a budget, having a savings and debt reduction plan, and understanding their financial rights and responsibilities. Sounds good, right? The first Financial Literacy Month in Canada was in 2011, so this year marks the 8th official Financial Literacy Month. And since this is season number 5 of this podcast, that means I've already done 4 shows over the last 4 years on financial literacy education in Canada. On my first show on the subject, episode 9, back in November 2014, my guest was Jane Rooney, Canada's financial literacy leader, then and now. In 2015, on show number 62, my guest was Dave Mitchell, a retired high school teacher, with his thoughts on how financial literacy can be taught in school. And in 2016, on show number 116, my guest was Prakash Amarasoria, a young man heavily involved in his community with lots of ideas to share. And last year, on show number 166, I decided not to have any guests, and I just went off on a 15-minute rant explaining why I didn't think the government's approach to financial literacy will work. And here we are in 2018, and we are having the same conversation yet again. Has anything changed? Do we even have a financial literacy problem? And if we do, what's the solution? Obviously, the government believes we have a financial literacy problem, or else they wouldn't be spending a lot of money on Financial Literacy Month. The conventional wisdom is that we have a big financial literacy problem in Canada because debt levels are high and we tend to over-concentrate our assets in real estate, which is very dangerous. But I can make the argument that we're doing fine. The economy seems to be doing well. Bankruptcy rates are low, house prices are still decent, so maybe everything is fine. But I get it. Household debt is near record high levels and saving rates are at record lows, and that indicates that we aren't good with money. If 2 of the stated objectives of Financial Literacy Month are to encourage Canadians to pay off debt and save money, I'd say that it doesn't appear to be working. So to avoid me going off on another 15-minute rant, I've asked Ted Michaelis to join me to keep the discussion on track. So Ted, the economy is doing well, but we have record levels of debt. So what's your opinion? Are we financially literate or not?
Yeah, I don't think debt levels have a lot to do with as a measure of financial literacy. I go out and I buy an expensive house and I put a mortgage for 2/3 or 3/4 of the value. Does that mean I'm financially illiterate or I have a lot of debt? I mean, the two things don't necessarily connect. It's a bad connection.
Okay, so before we get off the rails here then, let's start with the basic question. Let's start with the definition. What is financial literacy? What are we talking about? How do you define it?
It's your ability to make reasonable financial decisions. So it's a combination of knowledge and action.
Okay, I think there's more to it than that, but I think that's a good start. So let's cover the basics of that first. So if financial knowledge is important, why is it important? I mean, I can go on the internet and I can use the Google and I can find everything I need to know. So is it really necessary to understand the difference between a TFSA and an RSP? You know, can't I just Google what I need to know when I know it? Is it really that important?
See, I knew you were going to ask me that question because I've got it right here in the script.
We got a script here. Okay.
That's some basics about this stuff. 5 reasons why being financially literate is important now.
Okay.
So 100 years ago, every transaction you did was with cash. So cash is pretty easy to understand. You either have it or you don't. If you don't have it, you can't spend it. You can't get into too much trouble. Today, nobody has cash. In fact, you know, my kid's Monopoly set now comes with a credit card instead of paper money. It just drives me nuts.
Wow.
So people aren't being taught to use cash anymore, and the psychology behind a credit card or credit is significantly different.
Yeah, so everything is credit and debt now, which is electronic. You don't have that cash in your hand, so it's not quite as real as you.
You just don't feel like it's happening.
And as a result, you can get into a whole lot more money. Okay, so that's a good reason why it's important to be financially literate. Reason number 2.
Yeah, we suffer the results of our decisions more than we ever have in the past. So in the past, I could be a poor money manager throughout my life I retire, I get a company pension, and I'd be okay. Well, there are very few company pensions anymore. I mean, we contribute to our employees' RSPs and hope that they'll look after themselves, and we're pretty typical. So now, if I'm a poor money manager throughout my life, I could end up just on government pensions.
Well, and we live a lot longer, too. I mean, 100 years ago, you retired at 65, died at 67.
And everything was okay.
It was okay. It was all good back then. So, okay, we suffer the consequences of our decisions a lot more, so therefore it's important to make good decisions.
To make better decisions.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, so the third reason, finances are a lot more complex than they used to be. So remember, the first point was you had cash, you spent it, it was gone, you couldn't spend it anymore. Well, now you've got access to so many different credit tools. You've got so many different saving vehicles. There's no way that any one person can be fully knowledgeable on any of this stuff anymore, particularly someone that's, it's not what they do for a living.
Yeah, and so as a result, I can much more easily make perhaps not the optimal decision. I put it in this and that and so on.
Well, and you're influenced by marketing more than you ever were in the past. So this is the newest thing. It must be great. You go out and you do it.
Yeah, and back in the days of cash, I took my cash and I bought my stuff.
Right.
Wasn't a whole lot of marketing at the general store, I guess.
And the extent of your bank accounts was I put it in a savings account so I could buy the next big thing.
And that was probably back when they actually paid interest in a savings account. So those are the good old days. So, yes. Okay, so those are 3 reasons why being financially literate is important.
So number 4, let's talk about technology. So it used to be if you wanted to have a bank account, you had to actually go into the bank. So now if I want to deposit my paycheck, my paycheck's automatically deposited like most people, but if it wasn't, I take a picture on my phone and it's in the bank. So I don't go to the branch anymore. I don't necessarily fully understand the whole system anymore. It's just all automated.
Well, and I'm not going to mention what bank I'm with because I think they're all the same, but I'm now getting this message popping up saying we need to enable 2-factor authentication. What's your phone number? What's your email address? Please click it here.
Text me here, phone me here.
Yeah,
yes.
and so I'm thinking, okay, well, if I lose my phone or if my phone's, in the car and I'm trying to make a transaction, I can't get into my own bank account now? And I'm, reasonably sophisticated.
Reasonably.
I have a kid who can show me how to turn on my phone, so that's good. But what if I'm a senior and I don't have a smartphone and I don't know how to do all this stuff? So I think the technology is great, but it also makes things a little more difficult. So it's one more thing to learn about.
Well, and then the last person is that there's just so many people doing it. Let's just use the bank as an example. Used to be you'd go into the bank and you'd see the teller. You'd know the teller would know you. They'd ask about your kids. I actually still get this level of service at my bank.
Oh, wow.
Because they know me. And my kids are cute. But most people don't know who they're talking to anymore. There's no relationship anymore. And they do that on purpose. There's a selling experience when you need a new service. But beyond that, it's, you're just a number in the machine.
Okay, so that's 5 good arguments why it would be good to have more financial knowledge, be more financially literate. But, I also made the point at the start that after 8 years, the government's approach to financial literacy doesn't seem to be working. So is there any point in the government continuing to lead the charge on improving financial literacy? And before you, answer the question as to whether government lectures are the solution, because I think anyone who's listened to this podcast knows what your answer would be. I'm asking a rhetorical question here. Let me ask you a real question. So you mentioned that you've got, 3 cute daughters.
Yep.
They're all like little kids. They're not teenagers yet. Kids learn through trial and error, reading, asking around, watching their parents. Lectures from teachers are probably not the best way in most cases to learn real life skills or to get people to take action. So should the government continue to fund Financial Literacy Month? Is there any point?
Well, let's start with a really short answer. Should the government teach me how to cook dinner?
That's a good question.
I don't think the government can be any more effective at teaching financial literacy than it can be teaching my kid how to make spaghetti sauce. I think it's one of those skills that at that high a level, what the government's doing is they're providing, it's a photo op for the government. This is something we're doing. It sounds like motherhood.
You're
we're
saying it's
good.
Political? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying
the government is doing something political to help them get reelected.
The utility of Financial Literacy Month is questionable, in my opinion.
Questionable. There you go. So there's your condemnation of it.
Right.
Okay, so we can all agree that we could be better at managing our money.
Right.
And we can all agree that government programs are probably not the best path to freedom.
Correct.
So what can we do? So how can we as individuals be more literate about managing our money? Because the whole point of this show is to give practical advice to people, not to be, speaking in fancy words and code that doesn't mean anything. So at the start of the show, you said that financial literacy is knowledge plus action, knowing what to do and how to do it. Now, I said I think there's more to it than that. So the Doug Hoy's three-pronged approach to financial literacy here, and I guess I should patent that phrase, is there are three things. Technical knowledge is important. Self-knowledge and knowledge of the other guy would be the three prongs that I would talk about. So I think to consider yourself to be financially literate, you need the technical knowledge. That makes sense.
Yep.
But also those other two things. So now you agree that technical knowledge is important. That was how you started off. So to complete the discussion, give me some examples of what we are talking about when we say you need technical knowledge.
Okay. So first and foremost, and it's not the order that we've got them in the script here, the most important thing you need to understand is the concept of interest. Interest is simply how much it costs for other people to use money. So it's renting money from somebody else. When you put money in a savings account, the bank pays you interest because they're using your money someplace else. When you borrow money from a bank on a credit card, a loan, a line of credit, anything, you are paying interest because you're using somebody else's money. Understanding interest and compounding interest is the single most important thing, and very few people actually get that. Following from that, then, you need to be able to keep track. There's an accountability issue. So how do you make a budget? How do you keep track of what you're earning, what you're spending? It's just ins and outs. Don't let the accounting terms scare you or intimidate you, but if you don't actually keep track of how you're using your money, how are you going to change the way you use it? And third, you need to understand some key differences to some of the products that are out there. So, for example, right now you can get a tax-free savings account, TFSA. How's that different from an RRSP? So the jargon is quite intimidating for a lot of people. We should set a list of specific jargon, specific terms you should be familiar enough with, at least to understand what they are to see if you want them.
And I think what you're describing is how most people would think of financial literacy. Yeah, okay,
right.
I need to understand how interest rates work and what compounding is and all the rest of it.
Yep.
And that's the focus of the government's website when you look at it, all of these things. But, is it important for me to know all of those things, or is it important to know them when I need to know them? And most importantly, is the government doing the right thing on their website saying, okay, here's all the basics, that's what we're going to explain? Is that really what the government should be doing?
Yeah, the role for the government in education is done through the schools and in education. Trying to educate the general public with a website or with an ad campaign that lasts for a month every year is just it's ineffective, is my opinion. It doesn't make any sense.
And so, my opinion is there's tons of resources out there.
Right.
Why not? There's really no excuse why you can't learn the difference between a TFSA and an RRSP yourself. There's tons
if you want to.
If you want to, yeah.
Right.
It's not like 100 years ago where if I couldn't make it to the library, I couldn't learn anything. Now we've got all the knowledge of humanity on my phone. So, there's tons of resources out there. FCAC has the financial literacy section on their website. Obviously, there's web articles, YouTube, tons of great personal finance books out there. There really is no excuse for not having access to the information. But I guess you hit the key point. You actually have to want to do it.
And it's got to be in a digestible format for you. So I could do a Google search right now on TFSAs, and I could get one report from a technical advisor that'll tell me all the minutiae of it, the actual tax laws associated with it. Or I could get one from a bank saying these are the reasons why you should invest the money in this way and how it'll grow. So there's more to it than just the technical knowledge. You've got to be able to interpret it and appreciate it at your own level of expertise. And that's probably where the education role comes in.
Yeah, but even searching around on YouTube, I can find a 2-minute video explaining the basics of a TFSA, or I can find a 30-minute lecture. So the resources are probably out there, but you actually got to look for them.
Yeah, you have to use them.
So, okay, my opinion is there's no shortage of books, websites, blogs, apps, publications on personal financial
topics. Did you mention books? Was there
books,
a mention of books there?
Books. We'll talk books. I've got some suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
I think more knowledge is good, but I don't think that's the biggest problem when it comes to why financial literacy education is failing.
Yep.
I think the much bigger problem and what's much more important is actually understanding yourself, some self-knowledge. So, you mentioned my book, so let's talk about it. My book, Straight Talk on Your Money. I talk about how we don't make rational decisions. We think we make all our decisions by gathering the facts and making a rational decision. But, my opinion is facts don't matter when it comes to making decisions.
Whatever feels good or
whatever
feels
good. It's based on emotion. Exactly right. So now, people are listening to this going, well, of course facts matter. Well, yeah, facts matter to the outcome. If you jump off a 2-story building, you're going to break your leg. That's just a fact. So the outcome will be determined by the facts, but we don't consider the facts when we make a decision. We consider them after the fact to justify our decision. So let me give you some examples. Buying a house. I mean, why are house prices so high? Well, we want to own, and so instead of renting, I'm owning. I want to keep up with the Joneses. So even though renting may make more financial sense, that's what we do. Cars. Now, you're a car guy. You understand cars.
Yeah.
Why is it that people buy cars? Is it because they analyze the fuel economy and the safety rating, and that's how they come up with the best car to buy? Or is it something other than that in most cases?
Yeah, the single most important reason for most people is the color.
Well,
I like the way it looks.
I like the way it looks.
Yeah,
exactly
I like the way
right.
it feels. I like the way it makes me feel.
I can visualize myself driving to work in this car, and that's why I buy it. And then after the fact, if people ask me, they say, wow, it's got really good fuel mileage and safety rating is high and all the rest of it. Now, those are all big dollar examples.
Yep.
But I think it's the same for every kind of decision we make. So, I mean, let's talk about the book here. Straight Talk on Your Money, page 8. I put a little bookmark in here because I asked the question about toothpaste, which is not a big dollar decision. And I asked the question, so what brand of toothpaste do you currently use? How long have you been using it? Why did you start using that brand? And does that brand meet your criteria for the best toothpaste? So I guess if we were informed consumers, we'd make a chart and we'd say, well, okay, cavity prevention, whitening, breath freshening costs, these are all the reasons that we should select a toothpaste.
Right.
And yet, in actual fact, why do you use the toothpaste you use? Well, because I've always used it. Right. That's the one my parents used, so now I use it. Or, well, when I got married, my spouse used that kind, so I just switched to that kind. I mean, maybe it was because it was on sale.
Probably.
But is it a rational decision that we pick the toothpaste? No, it's probably just entirely emotions. So if that's how we're making all these decisions, then that's, I mean, well, I got more examples. I mean, there was the Caltech wine tasting study. They took a bunch of the same bottle of wine.
Yep.
And on some of them, they put a higher price than others. And they asked people, hey, which one tastes better? Well, you know what happened.
Right.
The higher priced wines scored higher in taste, even though they were identical. On podcast number 199, I had Robert Geniak on. We talked about the Diderot effect. So I just bought a bigger house, and so, or maybe a newer house, something a little better, and I look at, well, I can't have my old couch anymore.
Right. Now I need stuff.
I need better stuff. Even though I was perfectly happy with that stuff last week, now I'm not happy with it again. Again, it's not a rational thing. It's an emotional thing. So let's go to the practical advice section of the show, because otherwise I'm just going to keep ranting on in here. How can someone recognize that they're making emotional decisions and kind of pull back and make it a little bit more rational?
Okay. So you probably won't recognize that you're making an emotionally based decision. So what we want you to do is just ask yourself some simple questions before you do something.
Because you're in a bubble.
Right.
And you can't tell you're in a bubble when you're in a bubble. So, okay. So what kind of questions should you be asking yourself?
So probably the first one, do you need it? So whatever this thing is you're thinking about purchasing, buying, renting, do you actually need it? So are you getting it to fulfill a specific need, or are you getting it because I just saw an ad on TV and it looked pretty cool, or the model looked nice, or whatever the heck it was, right? Second question then, okay, I've decided that I need it. Can I afford it? So this one, nobody ever thinks of that. Sometimes they might think, can I afford the monthly payment, the weekly payment? Can I actually afford to buy this thing that I'm buying? And I would add in here, do I need it now? So do I need it? Do I need it now? Can I afford it? Because that's kind of a sequence of events. I do need it, but I don't need it today, so it doesn't matter if I can afford it. So
yeah, and if I need it or want it and don't have the cash for it today, then obviously I'm going to have to finance it if I want it today, which brings a whole nother component to it.
Or you're going to find a substitute. So that's the next one. So do I need it? Can I afford it? Is there an alternative? And sometimes the alternative, I mean, it's things you don't think of. I'm not suggesting everybody go out and start doing Uber instead of buying a car or something, but there always are alternatives that you should at least take the second to consider.
Well, instead of the name brand toothpaste I've always been buying, well, is there some cheaper version? I mean,
buy whatever one's on sale this week. No, people won't do that.
Well, and maybe there's valid reasons for not doing that, but again, it's have you thought about it?
Right.
Is really what you're saying. So,
well, and so the last bullet really would be, do you need to make this decision today? Is there any urgency to what you're doing? So lots of times, particularly with big ticket items, they're either pressured into it because of the sales, or they pressure themselves into it. I want it now. I need it now. I got to have it now. Almost always that's not true. Put it off for a couple of days. Maybe you find out you put it off for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months.
So waiting a few days, that makes perfect sense because, that's a good one. And I think that brings us then to the final element of my 3 prongs of financial literacy, which is understanding the other guy. So anytime you buy something, there's you, and then there's the person who's selling it to you. Any financial transaction, there's 2 parties to it. So, and of course, that person has their own biases, their own objectives, and so on. So sometimes it's really easy to figure it out. I go to the car dealership. I'm met by the car salesperson. It's pretty obvious what the relationship is. They are there to sell me a car.
Right.
So I go in there and I'm all on guard and I know they're, going to try to sell me something. So I'm ready. But a lot of times it's much less obvious. And we already, use the example of the bank. I go into the bank and I don't get the same level of personal service you get, but I go in there occasionally. And of course they can see who I am when I put my little card in the machine. They go, "Oh, Mr. Hoyes, I see that you have some cash in your bank account. Would you like to invest in one of our mutual funds because you'll earn a much greater rate of return?"
Right.
And on the surface, you think, well, that's pretty good. They're obviously looking out for me.
Right.
Well, no, actually, they earn a commission for selling you the mutual fund. They don't earn anything if it stays there in the savings account. So, and I talked about this on podcast number 213 with Sandy Martin, where she talked about the compensation matrix.
Right.
The bank person, if they see that you've got some money in your bank account, will never suggest, "Hey, why don't you make a payment against your mortgage and pay it down quicker? Why don't you pay down your line of credit?" No, it's always something else where they earn a greater rate of return. So sometimes waiting is the answer. Obviously, the real answer is to think about what the other guy's motivation is, what they're saying. So, so what's your practical advice to help someone understand the motivation of the other guy?
Okay. So here's a technical term for everybody. You've probably heard it before. Caveat emptor.
Ah, yes, Latin.
Let the buyer beware. So nobody's going to assume responsibility for you except for you. At the end of the day, it's your money. You're the guy who's got to make the decision, the lady that's got to make the decision, the person that's making the decision.
You're the boss.
Nobody else is going to do that for you. And at the end of the day, if you make a bad decision, you're the one who has to live with the consequences. Be skeptical. Whoever you're talking to, don't necessarily believe them. They've got their own agenda, and it doesn't have to be an evil or nefarious agenda. It's just different than yours. The most important person to you is
you.
Yep. Most important person to them is them. All right.
And that's really what we're talking about here. Yep. Understanding that the person on the other side of the transaction has an agenda.
Yep.
Well, what could their agenda possibly be? The car salesperson, it's easy to understand. The bank person, it's a little trickier.
Well, on the car salesperson, you bring that one up. The car salesman is not actually selling you a car. The car salesman is selling you the decision to buy the car. And then you sit down with the finance manager who sells you the car and 6 other products at the same time that you weren't even thinking about. So there's more. Anyway.
And that's why you've got to be skeptical, and that's why you got to have your
and you got to know what their agenda is. Yep.
Well, and as I said in chapter 3 of Straight Talk on Your Money, nobody cares about your money as much as you do.
Right.
And that's really the
Except
point
maybe
you're
my
making.
kids.
There you go. Well, I mean, experts are biased. Bank tellers get paid a commission for what they sell you. And again, Sandy Martin talked about the compensation matrix and how they're compensated. So, you buy the mutual fund, they get a commission. You pay down debt, they don't. So let's wrap up this 3-pronged approach to financial literacy with a simple example. So let's say that, Ted, you've got a relative, a nephew who's a teenager. And they come to you and say, "Hey, Uncle Ted, I'm going to the mall to buy a cell phone. So what, you're wise. You're a wise old man.
Hey, thank you.
What advice would you give me on buying this cell phone?" So we got the 3 prongs of financial literacy. So technical knowledge. What kind of things would you be telling them to be aware of?
So you need to understand not only the features you're looking for in the phone, but the features you're looking for in the plan, the service plan for the phone. So the technical knowledge is, how does the device work and how am I going to use that device? So that makes sense. So with the phone, I need it to have a decent camera because I like to take pictures of the dogs when they're running in the yard. I need it to have a built-in calendar function because I use it like my personal planner. The service plan, I never text, so I don't care about those minutes, but I'm talking to my kids all the time on the phone, so I need lots and lots of minutes that I can share between plans, that sort of thing.
All teenagers need tons of text. They don't actually talk on a phone.
So you need to understand the technicalities of the device or the service plan, whatever you're getting into.
And that's the kind of thing where you can go on the website and read through it all and understand what all the features are. And
you got to do that homework ahead of time. So
before you get there.
This is part of knowing about the device. And again, your point about knowing about yourself. You need to know what you want before you go shopping, or they're going to tell you what you want, which is whatever they want to sell.
Well, and that's the second prong is the self-knowledge. So understanding why it is that I want to buy that $1,000 new iPhone as opposed to something else that probably also takes pictures and sends text. It's a self-knowledge thing. So understanding what you yourself want. Okay, so the third prong then is understanding what the other guy's motivation is. So the guy at the mall who's selling me this phone, I shouldn't be taking his advice on what the best phone is, or how should I be approaching that?
Well, again, you've got to be skeptical. You've got to assume that he's got an agenda and that he has to sell so many phones a day if he wants to keep his job. That's how he gets paid. On the other hand, you don't have to assume that he's evil. Like, he's not going to put you in something that's completely worthless. Or if you get the vibe that that's what's happening, you need to go someplace else. I mean, there's an inherent level of assumed trust in any kind of sales transaction. You don't know what the salesman knows. You know what you need, and hopefully they can find the right product for you. But at the end of the day, they're going to find a product for you, something for you to buy, whether or not it's what you need or not.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way of putting it. You shouldn't assume that they're evil.
Right.
Because they're not. They're doing a job. I mean, that's what they're
That's
there
how they
for.
make their living.
But by the same token, you shouldn't assume that they're perfectly aligned with you, too. They might need to get rid of a certain brand of phone this month because they got too many of them, so that's the one that they're pushing.
Yeah, there's the classic Christmas movie, right? Where the Santa Claus is at Macy's telling him to shop someplace else. But Macy's is telling him to shop at Gimbel's. Never happened in the real world.
No,
because
that's
definitely
a fantasy.
Santa Claus doesn't work in the real world.
So,
I lost you with that one, didn't I?
We're not going to trash Santa Claus on this podcast. Like there are certain lines we just cannot go over. So, okay, big picture then. I think what you're saying, if I may put words in your mouth, is you're not a huge fan of the government being the lead dog on how to improve our financial literacy.
Yes, I see it for what it is and not very useful.
Okay. And so your advice to the average person listening to us today then who wants to be more financially literate is what?
Yeah. You have a responsibility to educate yourself, and there are lots of free resources available. As we mentioned earlier, you could Google any one of these topics. First and foremost, understand the concept of interest, compounding interest. And then second, understand you need to appreciate what it is that you need, what you're shopping for before you actually go out and spend any money.
Yeah, and compounding works both ways. If you've got money that's in savings that's compounding, it grows. And if you've got debt, well, it goes the other way. So, okay, well, I think that's great advice. And that's why I say there's three prongs to it. You got to have the technical knowledge. Yep. Tons of resources out there. Feel free to use them. Lots of them are free or have very low cost. But understand why you're making the decisions you are and put yourselves in the shoes of the other guy so that you understand what's motivating them.
It's not in anybody's best interest except for yours to increase your financial literacy. It's not in the bank's best interest for you to understand how this stuff works. It's certainly not in the retailers or sellers' interest for you to understand how all this stuff works. It's only in your interest because you're protecting yourself now and yourself in the future.
Yep, simple as that. I mean, it's up to you. Your success is up to you. It's not up to the government. It's not up to any of these other advisors. It's entirely up to you.
Right.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a great way to end it. Ted, thanks for being here today.
Always happy. That's
our show for today. Full show notes, including a transcript and links to everything Ted and I talked about today, can be found at hoyes.com. That's HOYES.com. Everybody, enjoy Financial Literacy Month. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.